The grand ballroom of the San Francisco Tech Forum hummed with muted excitement, the kind that came from a roomful of brilliant minds. Rows of polished chairs faced a sleek, elevated stage where Elon Musk stood, his casual demeanor at odds with the tailored suit he wore. He gestured toward a screen displaying a futuristic cityscape, the kind of bold, impossible vision that only he could make seem tangible. And with this approach, Elon said, his voice calm yet magnetic, we're not just aiming for sustainability, we're aiming for abundance. A ripple of applause followed, but not from Barron Wells. Seated in the third row, her hands remained folded in her lap. She tilted her head slightly, her sharp gray eyes narrowing in a way that hinted at both curiosity and challenge. Barron, the CEO of a rapidly expanding biotech company, was no stranger to ambitious men or grandiose ideas. Her own success was built on a mixture of precision and daring, traits that had earned her respect and fear in equal measure. During the Q&A, she raised her hand. Elon, she began, her tone cool but piercing. Your vision is undoubtedly inspiring. But how do you address the ethical risks of resource monopolization? Won't abundance for some lead to scarcity for others? The room fell silent, the kind of silence that stretched like a taut wire. Elon paused, studying her for a moment, his expression unreadable. That's a fair question, he said finally, a faint smile curling his lips. But scarcity is an old paradigm. With the right technology, we can dissolve those boundaries. It's not about hoarding, it's about scaling access for everyone. Barron nodded slightly, but her gaze didn't soften. Elon caught it, a spark of intrigue, perhaps even defiance, and something in him shifted. When the session ended, he approached her before she could slip away. Barron Wells, right? He said, extending his hand. Your work in regenerative medicine is incredible. She shook his hand, her grip firm. Thank you. And your work, well, it's certainly ambitious. He chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. You're not sold on my vision, though. Not yet, she replied, the faintest hint of a smile playing at her lips. Then let me buy you dinner, he said, his tone playful but his eyes serious. I'd like to change your mind. Barron hesitated. She had built her career on carefully measured risks. Accepting an invitation from one of the most visible men in the world wasn't something she'd normally consider. But there was something in his demeanor, not arrogance, but conviction, that intrigued her. Dinner, then, she said. But I don't promise to be convinced. As they walked out together, the room buzzed behind them, though neither seemed to notice. What had begun as a simple question was already evolving into something far more complex. The restaurant was discreet, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city where the tech elite sought solace from their constant visibility. Dim lighting cast soft shadows on the minimalist decor, the hum of conversation low and soothing. Elon and Barron were seated in a private booth, the world outside momentarily held at bay. Why biotech? Elon asked, swirling his glass of sparkling water. You could have chosen any industry with your background. Barron set her fork down, her movements deliberate. Biotech isn't just an industry, it's humanity's next frontier. Fixing the damage we've done to ourselves and the planet isn't optional, it's survival. Elon nodded, intrigued. We're chasing the same horizon from different angles, then. She arched an eyebrow. Perhaps. But your angles tend to be broader. He laughed, the sound unexpectedly warm. Fair. I get accused of thinking too big all the time. Not just big. Unfathomable. Barron leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. But I admire that. It's rare to meet someone willing to risk everything for a vision. For a moment, silence stretched between them, not awkward but heavy with unspoken understanding. Elon's expression shifted, more thoughtful now. What drives you? He asked, his voice quieter. It's not just ambition. There's something else. Barron hesitated. She wasn't used to peeling back the layers of herself, especially not with someone she barely knew. But something in Elon's gaze, curiosity without judgment, prompted her to speak. When I was a kid, my mother died of a disease that could have been cured if the research had been funded sooner, she said, her voice steady but edged with pain. I decided I'd never let someone else die because of short-sightedness. Elon's eyes darkened, his expression empathetic. I'm sorry. She shook her head. It's not about sympathy. It's about purpose. That's why I ask the hard questions. Vision without execution isn't enough. That's why you'll succeed, he said, his tone resolute. You're willing to fight for the details. Barron smiled faintly. And you're willing to dream so big that the rest of us have to catch up. The conversation drifted to their shared frustrations, bureaucracy, skepticism, the loneliness of leadership. By the time the check arrived, the connection between them had deepened, not through flirtation but mutual respect. Outside, the city lights stretched endlessly into the night. As they stood by the curb waiting for their cars, Elon turned to her. You're not convinced yet, are you? He asked. She smirked. Not entirely. But you've made me curious. That's a start, he said, his smile lingering as her car pulled up. Barron got in, but as the car drove away, she glanced back at him through the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, she felt the faint stirrings of something she hadn't allowed herself to consider, possibility. It was past midnight when they found themselves on a rooftop, the dinner's formalities long behind them. The city sprawled below, a sea of lights and muted chaos that seemed impossibly distant. The air was crisp, the kind that made every breath feel sharper, more alive. Barron leaned against the edge of the railing, her face tilted toward the sky. You forget how small you are up here, she murmured. It's humbling. Elon stood beside her, his hands in his pockets. I like it. It puts everything into perspective. She glanced at him. Does it? You spend your life trying to conquer the impossible. Perspective doesn't seem to slow you down. He chuckled softly. Maybe not. But moments like this remind me why it matters. Barron studied him for a moment. There was something disarming about him here, away from the stage and the cameras. The ambition was still there, but it was quieter, more human. You're not what I expected, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Good or bad? Still deciding. He laughed again, but this time it faded quickly, replaced by a lingering stillness. Their eyes met, and for a moment either spoke. The world seemed to pause, the noise of their lives receding into silence. I shouldn't, Barron said quietly, as if to herself. Neither should I, Elon replied, his voice equally soft. And yet, as the wind stirred around them, they both leaned in. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than an answer. But it deepened quickly, the weight of their shared lives falling away as they gave in to the moment. When they finally pulled apart, Barron stepped back, her breath unsteady. This is complicated. Elon nodded, his gaze steady. Everything worth doing is. Barron's lips curved into a faint smile. That's a dangerous philosophy. He smiled back. It's gotten me this far. They stood in silence for a moment longer, the gravity of what had just happened settling between them. Then, with a glance at her watch, Barron sighed. I should go, she said, though the reluctance in her voice was clear. Elon didn't try to stop her. Good night, Barron. Good night, Elon, she replied, her voice softer now. As she walked toward the exit, she felt the weight of the night pressing down on her, but also, strangely, a lightness she hadn't felt in years. The kiss had been a risk, but it had also been something else entirely, a beginning. The sound of rushing water filled the secluded cabin in Big Sur, where Elon and Barron sat on a rustic couch. The fire crackled softly, its warmth pushing back the chill of the ocean air. They had slipped away from the chaos of their public lives for a rare weekend together, far from the cameras and whispered speculations. Barron held a steaming mug of tea, her posture unusually relaxed. This feels surreal, she said, gazing at the fire. Like we're living someone else's life for a few days. Elon glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. Maybe it's the only part that's real. The rest of it, all the noise, it's not who we are. She turned to him, her brow furrowing slightly. But it's part of what we've built. The noise pays for these quiet moments. He leaned back, his gaze fixed on the flames. And it's what will tear us apart if we're not careful. The weight of his words settled over them. Their affair, already precarious, felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm. Every stolen glance, every encrypted call, every rendezvous in shadowed corners, it all came with a price. Do you ever regret it? Barron asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon turned to her, his eyes steady. No. Do you? She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. Not yet. But I'm afraid of what happens when we're found out. Their conversations grew heavier as the weekend progressed. Between moments of intimacy, they shared stories of their pasts, exposing vulnerabilities neither had shown the world. Elon spoke of his sleepless nights, his relentless drive to achieve the impossible. Barron shared her fear of failure, the isolation of being a woman in a room full of doubters. Yet, as they parted on Sunday night, each retreating to their separate realities, the walls of secrecy seemed to close in tighter. The headline hit Barron's desk like a thunderclap. Elon Musk spotted with mystery woman. Who is she? Her assistant hovered nervously nearby as Barron scanned the article. The photos weren't incriminating, just her walking into a building Elon owned, but the insinuations were loud enough to drown out the truth. She tossed the tablet onto her desk, rubbing her temples. It was only a matter of time. She muttered. Her PR manager leaned forward. We need to issue a statement. Deny everything. Distance yourself. And if I don't? The manager hesitated. Then it becomes a feeding frenzy. You'll lose control of the narrative. Barron glanced at her reflection in the office window, the city skyline stretching beyond. She had spent her life controlling every aspect of her image, yet now it felt like sand slipping through her fingers. Elon called later that evening. We need to talk, he said, his voice tense. We're talking now. Barron replied, though she already knew what he meant. This leak isn't going away. My board is already asking questions. Investors hate uncertainty. Do you regret it now? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. There was a pause. No, he said firmly. But I need to know what you want. If we keep this up, we're both putting everything at risk. Barron closed her eyes. She wanted to tell him it wasn't fair, that they shouldn't have to choose. But fairness wasn't part of their reality. I need time, she said finally. So do I. Elon replied, the exhaustion in his voice mirroring her own. The snow fell softly around the villa in the Swiss Alps, blanketing the world in quiet. Inside, Elon and Barron sat across from each other in front of a massive window, the crackling fire between them failing to thaw the tension. We can't keep running, Elon said, breaking the silence. It's not sustainable. Barron stared out at the snow. You mean us? He shook his head. I mean the secrecy. The lies. It's exhausting, Barron. For both of us. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. And what's the alternative? Going public? Turning our lives into a circus? Maybe. His voice was calm but resolute. Maybe it's better than hiding. At least then we'd be in control. She laughed bitterly. Control? The media doesn't let people like us have control. They'll twist everything. They'll dig into our pasts, spin rumors, pit us against each other. Is that what you want? No, he admitted. But I want you. And I don't see another way. Barron's defenses crumbled under the weight of his words. She wanted him too, had wanted him since that first night on the rooftop. But the price felt too steep. I've spent my entire career protecting my reputation, she said quietly. If I lose that, what's left? Elon reached across the table, taking her hand in his. You'll still have me. And we'll figure it out together. For a long time, she didn't respond. The fire crackled, the snow fell, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Barron nodded, her eyes meeting his. Together then? But we do it on our terms. Elon smiled, relief softening his features. Our terms. They leaned toward each other, the firelight casting flickering shadows on their faces. The decision had been made, and there would be no turning back. The press conference room in New York City buzzed with anticipation, the air thick with the hum of cameras and murmured speculation. Elon Musk stood behind the podium, calm and unflinching, a man accustomed to the spotlight. The crowd of reporters hung on his every word as he unveiled the latest project from one of his ventures, a revolutionary renewable energy initiative. But it wasn't the announcement that held their attention. It was the glimmer of something more in his tone, a subtle but deliberate shift in his delivery. "We've always focused on innovation," Elon said, his gaze sweeping the room. "But no great idea happens in isolation. Collaboration is the key to progress. It's why I've had the privilege of working with extraordinary minds, like Barron who shares a passion for solving humanity's toughest challenges." The name sent a ripple through the audience. A murmur rose, followed by a barrage of raised hands and shouted questions. "Are you confirming your relationship with Ms. Wells? Does this mean she'll be joining Tesla or SpaceX?" Elon held up a hand, his demeanor unshaken. "Barron and I are committed to the same vision of a better future. The details will come in time." Behind the curtain, Barron stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had agreed to this strategy, an indirect admission, just enough to quell the rumors without losing control, but hearing her name in that room made it all too real. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the stage. The cameras flashed wildly as she joined Elon, her head held high. "Thank you for the warm introduction," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions. "Elon and I have always believed that the challenges of our time demand unity, not division. Our partnership, both professional and personal, is rooted in that belief." The room erupted in questions, but neither of them stayed to answer. They exited side by side, their steps synchronized, the world now fully aware of the connection they had fought so hard to keep hidden. The backlash came swiftly, as they knew it would. Barron's inbox overflowed with messages, some supportive, others scathing. A major investor pulled out of one of her biotech projects, citing concerns about the distraction of her personal life. Tabloids dredged up old stories, painting her as either a calculating power player or a naive woman ensnared by Elon's charm. At Tesla, the stock took a brief dip, fueled by speculation about Elon's judgment. Shareholders demanded an explanation, and some called for an emergency meeting to address his personal entanglements. In the quiet of her office, Barron stared at the glowing skyline outside. "Was this a mistake?" she asked when Elon called that evening. "Depends on how you define a mistake," he replied. "We knew it would be messy. But we also knew it was worth it." "Did we?" she challenged, her voice sharp. Elon paused, then said softly, "You don't think it's worth it?" Barron sighed, closing her eyes. "I don't know. Everything I built feels like it's slipping away." "And for what?" "A dream we can't even be sure of?" "For us," he said firmly. "For the chance to build something real." His words echoed in her mind as the days passed. They navigated the chaos together, each taking hits but refusing to falter. Elon held an emergency shareholder meeting, addressing concerns with his characteristic poise and pragmatism. Barron met with her board, reasserting her leadership with a renewed confidence. And slowly, the tide began to turn. The countryside estate was serene, nestled among rolling green hills dotted with wildflowers. It was a place untouched by the frenzy of the outside world, where time seemed to move slower. Barron and Elon sat on the veranda, sipping coffee as the morning sun bathed the landscape in golden light. They had escaped here to regroup, to breathe, and to figure out their next move. "We survived," Barron said, her tone carrying both relief and wonder. Elon smiled, setting his cup down. "Barely. But we did." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the wind ripple through the fields. Then Barron spoke. "We need to make this count," she said. "If we're going to face all of this together, we need to turn it into something bigger than ourselves." Elon nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. What if we launched a joint initiative? Something that combines our expertise, renewable energy and biotech. A global program to restore ecosystems and improve human health." Barron's eyes lit up, the fire of ambition sparking anew. A project like that could change the world. But it would need to be more than just talk. We'd need to bring in the best minds, the right resources. And we will, Elon said. Together. For the first time in weeks, Barron felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead would still be fraught with challenges, but they were no longer running or hiding. They had faced the storm and emerged stronger. As they outlined the framework of their initiative, their voices intertwined with the rustling breeze, their shared vision taking shape. And when the sun finally set, casting long shadows over the hills, they knew they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The sun was setting over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the horizon. Barron stood at the edge of the cliffside estate, her eyes fixed on the ocean below, as though searching for something beyond the crashing waves. The moment was peaceful, yet the weight of the past few weeks had settled heavily on her shoulders. She could feel Elon's presence before he spoke, the familiar rhythm of his footsteps approaching her from behind. "I've been thinking about what we're doing," he said, his voice low but steady. Barron didn't turn to face him, keeping her gaze on the endless expanse of water. "And what have you decided?" Elon stepped up beside her, standing at the same edge, their shoulders brushing lightly. "That we can't keep running. Not from the truth, not from the pressure, and certainly not from each other." She closed her eyes briefly, the words stirring something inside her. "What do you mean?" "It's time to stop pretending we can control everything," he said, his tone soft but resolute. "We've spent so much time protecting our image, shielding ourselves from the world, but it's been at the cost of what we really want. What we really need." Barron took a slow breath, her lips pressing together in a tight line. "And what's that?" He turned toward her now, his eyes locking with hers. "Each other." Her heart skipped a beat. The confession wasn't new, not in the way he said it, but the meaning of it, the gravity, felt like a new beginning. She looked away, staring into the depths of the ocean, as if it could offer her some clarity. "You're asking me to risk everything," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her own doubt. "To throw away everything I've worked for this." Elon reached out, placing his hand gently on her shoulder, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "I'm asking you to take a chance, Barron. A chance on us. We can't keep hiding in the shadows, pretending it's all about the work. We're more than that together." For a long time, she didn't respond, the silence between them growing heavier with each passing second. The crashing waves seemed to mirror her inner turmoil, the uncertainty, the fear, the hesitation. "I've lost so much," Barron said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep losing." Elon's gaze softened. "I know. But you don't have to lose this. Not if you don't want to." She looked up at him, her heart racing. The vulnerability in his eyes, the sincerity, the unwavering trust, everything about him felt like a promise. The decision was no longer just about ambition, or success, or the risk of their careers. It was about love, raw and undeniable. With a deep breath, Barron reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they had truly connected without the barriers of doubt or fear. "Okay," she said softly, her words a quiet vow. "Let's stop running." Elon's face broke into a smile, the tension in his shoulders dissipating as he pulled her closer. In that moment, the weight of the world seemed to lighten. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Barron realized that for the first time in her life, she was willing to embrace the unknown. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. And that was enough.